I'm very glad to be with you today for discussing, or at least introducing, our reflections for these 3 days on very large topics. I'm not myself either a philosopher per se, and so I will just try to ask some questions in this context. So we talk about what drives us to explore. Without going as far as Eric has gone, talking about Giordano Bruno and Galileo and all that. If we look back to the history of space, it's now been well known that space has not emerged by chance. Space activities have not been created ex nihilo. Space activities from a just mere historical point of view has clearly been related to a specific historical context. The post-World War II context, and the building of the two superpowers in a new strategic era. In particular, the convergence of two technologies, we all know that very well, you all know that very well, the ballistic missile on the one hand, and the nuclear bomb, shed a completely new light on the perspective of future devastating military conflicts, raising the fear of a definitive Pearl Harbor, and whether in the US or in the USSR, the perspective of a few dozens minutes of flights for deadly missiles led to raising the necessity to monitor ballistic arsenals, warn about possible launches as a top priority at the end of the 50s. And as soon as 1947, as you know, the first reports have been published in the US mentioning the possibility to launch a vessel with enough velocity at a sufficient altitude to help reach quasi-permanent monitoring using cameras on platforms, etc. We all know what has happened since then, with the very beginning of larger and larger, more and more diversified space activities. So in a sense, space is the son of the nuclear, of the World War, from a technical perspective, and also from a modern historical perspective. So it may sound very curious to evoke this political background of space in relation with the roots of space exploration. Obviously, this is addressing a completely different rationale. However, while we must recall that exploring space has taken shape in this particular context, we must also remember that the notion of competition between social and economic models has also been at the root of the race to the moon. Which means that the first step, and the only one to date, in space exploration era. But, and this is where the notion of space exploration must go much beyond the sole post-World War II context, other more structural features explain both the high visibility given to the space exploration race in those countries very early on, and more than that, what it has endured for decades and for so long, just winning a leading status in both countries. It's very curious that in this context of the post-World War conflict, we have this particular focus on space exploration. It's still the case in the US. It might have been the case in the USSR and Russia today, except that Russia today has a generalized political, economic, industrial difficulties that preventing this from being what happens today. So it means that we have to look deeper than these historical roots to find out about pre-existing political and societal mythologies to better understand this early and enduring massive investment in the human space exploration in these two countries. And rather curiously, when you do this research, you realize that it's rather possible to trace back preliminary cultural foundation to space exploration relatively at the same time in the two countries. I mean the second half of the 19th century. In a sense, the exploration of space was a product of the 19th century in these countries, with very much parallel, if not really similar considerations both tainted by a mix of religious achievements and scientific modernity, and some may say positivism. So let's take the case of Russia for some minutes. Many historical works are now mentioning the importance of a movement that was born centuries ago and materialized in the 19th century in Russia, what's called the Cosmism. Cosmism was a philosophical movement that seduced a significant part of the Russian intelligentsia at the end of the 19th century. What is Cosmism? It's in fact a reaction to the Western-led, I should say UK-led industrial revolution in the 19th century with the view that science and technology go hand in hand with cosmos and nature, and that this is the very destiny of humanity to live in concert with cosmos and nature. And in fact, the Russian view of the Industrial Revolution at that time, much before the communist political regime, was that science progress, the progress of industry, industrial revolution had to go hand in hand with a stronger link with nature, and even with a stronger link with cosmos on a spiritual scale. That was also a way to distinguish the Russian context, the philosophical Russian context, from something that was already considered as a dominating, westernized kind of way to think science and to think industrialization. Dostoevsky, for example, many people have worked on this since then, has been one of these authors very much invested in demonstrating that there was a Russian way to develop science and to augment the well-being of humanity in a Russian way. So you had already this political difference, let's say, in the background. The interesting things in Cosmism is that cosmos, you have two propositions, two assertions that have been made. First, cosmos and nature influence the human life and human activities. There is this notion that many natural events, even related with the cosmos, will have an impact on human life, on humanity as such. But the second assertion is that the human species' destiny is to master cosmos and nature. And then you have this dual relationship that in the same time you're influenced by nature and cosmos, and you're able to act on cosmos and nature. This is really what will drive a deep philosophical reflection in Russia at this time, at the end of the 19th century, very much in line also with religion. There was a religious aspect to all this. Anyway, to be brief, one of the most well-known cosmists was Tsiolkovsky. And you all know Tsiolkovsky. Tsiolkovsky is this famous physicist, Russian physicist, which said that the Earth is the cradle of the humanity, and you never saw a baby never living in a cradle. And so that there was this notion that humanity is destined to explore the cosmos and live forever in the cosmos. This has had a very much enduring impact on not only on the people of the time, but also, and it's less known, on the people, Russian people in the communist, in the USSR, and especially the elites. It's always been something that was in the background, not so much shown or recognized, but it was something that has been very much influential in creating an identity for the space program, for the Soviet space program, for the Russian space program. And today, since the end of this USSR system, this cosmism notion has revived. One of his strongest supporters is Vladimir Putin. He has demonstrated this many times, visiting some emblematic places linked to cosmism, and also having this view that he wanted to highlight the religious aspect of the contemporary Russian society. So it's interesting because you feel that you have here a very old relationship with the necessity to explore the cosmos, because it's linked to both philosophy, to religion. It's also linked to science and materialism. And you have a perfect cocktail here of a recipe for success. And space exploration, and especially human space exploration, was really ticking the box of this. And it's been really developed at this time, and I find that interesting. Why did I find that interesting? Because if you look now to the United States, you will see that almost exactly at the same moment, second half of the 19th century, you have two concepts, approaches, that have been publicized in the US with a very long heritage behind it later on, that also create a favorable background for space to flourish upon. The first one is the concept of manifest destiny. You may have heard about this manifest destiny concept. It comes from a journalist called John O'Sullivan, was born in 1839. And what does he say? Basically, he says that the United States have a specific manifest destiny to lead the world and to be in some sort of an elected society. But he has a very specific reason for that. And I'm going to quote a bit some of his writing. He has one text that has been published in 1843-45 that is the core of his demonstration. He says, "We have no interest in the scenes of antiquity, only as lessons of avoidance of nearly all their example. The expensive, not costly, expensive future is our arena and for our history. We are entering on its entry the space with the truth of God in our minds, beneficence and object in our earth, with a clear conscience, unsullied by the past, that we are the nation of human progress, and who will, what can, set limits to our onward march? Providence is with us, and no earthly power can. The far-reaching, the boundless future will be the era of the American greatness." This was written at the time when the United States were expanding and were conquering the land in the West. That was a text for the West. But this is very interesting because this has been a decisive benchmark, political benchmark for all successive powers afterwards, to identify the US, to create, I would say, to substantialize the very identity of the United States. In fact, in this text, the first part of this text is really devoted to demonstrating that the new world is different from the ancient world. And that this is precisely because they have this manifest destiny that the US are separating themselves from where they come from, the UK and the European countries. So that's interesting. It's trying, of course, to demonstrate the necessity for an unprecedented territorial expansion. And then you have the second text. All these texts are very much, even today, are taught in school, etc. These are really we really touch here the heart of the self-perception of what the US society here inside the United States. And there's another text which has the same value in terms of didacticism, I would say. It was written by an historian called Frederick Jackson Turner, and it's called The Significance of the Frontier in American History. It relates to the westward expansionist movement. It's very much related to O'Sullivan in this respect. And the meaning of this text is profound. Again, it's about defining the very identity of the US as compared with the ancient world. This is almost an obsession at the time. The frontier is the line, I quote Jackson Turner here. The frontier is the line of the most rapid and effectiveness Americanization. The wilderness masters the colonist. And he says that the West at bottom is a form of society rather than an area. In fact, the frontier is not a geographical area, it's a society. The Westman, and he mentions the fact, and he creates the link with O'Sullivan, the Westman believes in the manifest destiny of his country. The result, and I like this passage because I think it encapsulates quite well what we can experience today in our domains. The result is that to the frontier, the American intellect owes its striking characteristic, that coarseness and strength combined with acuteness and inquisitiveness, that practical, inventive turn of mind, quick to find expedients, that masterful grasp of material things lacking in the artistic but powerful to effect great ends, that restless, nervous energy, that dominant individualism working for the good or for evil, and with the buoyancy and the exuberance that comes with freedom. These are the traits of the frontier, or traits called out elsewhere because of the existence of the frontier. If you look at this and you connect that to space, you might, this is a manifest speech or a speech that seems tailor-made for space exploration. This is really, space exploration has been completely linked to this. I could quote a number of examples, but for example, one of the striking examples I have in mind right now, scientific probes that have been named Lewis and Clark, for example. Lewis and Clark were the two explorers that opened the West. It's not by chance. You always have this constant reference to the high frontier with Kennedy, to the next frontier with Ronald Reagan. Frontier is a consensus. It's an identity reference. So space has become an identity reference by connection. And human space exploration is at the heart of this reference. I think it's interesting to know. It's interesting to understand that, to understand why it has been so much boosted in those two societies, what it has endured as a collective endeavor. And it was shown this morning, you know, the figures are extraordinary. 400,000 people, hundreds of billions of dollars, etc. Of course, you had this showdown with the USSR and all that, but it's not enough. You need to understand why today you have these Artemises and all these programs. So I will stop there. I don't want to take too much, but it's good to have this in mind for us to question ourselves about what could be in Europe our references, our historical views. I have some answers, or at least some ideas for that. It's interesting also but I know less the society in China, what could be also the old references to the quest for space exploration. And I think this little detour is worth looking at, just to put us just a bit aside to look at this with a necessary perspective. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you.